Howdy, everyone. Well, I've been fooling around with this Canopy frame, and before I get too far along and forget what I've covered and what I have not covered, I'm going to do a little bit more filming here real quick. So here's what I've discovered. All right, again, this is just more information of things that I've noticed and things that I've been dealing with trying to get this Canopy frame to be as perfect as I can get it. What I am also doing is I'm trying to not have any induced stress in any of the framework as I build it. So in other words, I want things to lay and fit correctly without being clamped necessarily, without being riveted, without being pulled together really tight, with clamps and rivets and things like that. I want things to rest naturally and fit. So with that in mind, a couple of things. Originally, I had talked about the hinges. And the hinges, before you drill them, of course, you can have them move up and down. I had my hinges down so that the frame would sit down all the way. But what I have noticed now that I've drilled the holes in the hinges, when I have the skin on, it almost appears like the frame sits a little bit lower across the top between the hinges through here. It sits lower than the flange that this skin is attached to. So when the skin from the frame, which gets clecoed here, comes across forward, it kind of runs uphill. It's almost like this frame sits too low. That's one observation. One thing that I had tried was I made a long shim to go here, and I put holes in it. I put the skin over that, and then I clecoed the rest of the skin in place. But with the skin being up higher, it made it a little bit more difficult to get some of these clecos in because it sat up higher overall, which basically pulled some of the slack out of the curves. Now that made the curves areas of the skin fit a little bit nicer because it was pulled a little tighter. But I also noticed whenever I had the canopy slightly open, the skin was so tight in the curved area that I couldn't get it back closed because it would get hung up on areas like this. These areas in here, the skin would actually hit these little flanges and it wouldn't come up over. So I've decided I'm not going to worry about putting any kind of a spacer in here. Having said all that, I have also riveted this plate here. And of course, as we all know, it doesn't matter how many clecos you put in here. The rivets are always going to pull things tighter than a cleco ever will, and it's also potentially going to shift a little bit as you start your riveting process. Having done that, that has changed the shape of this overall frame ever so slightly. By making this rigid and having this installed as it is permanently, that has made this half of the frame in relationship to that half of the frame change ever so slightly. So now I have to come back and I have to try to manipulate the frame a little bit on these ends to get everything to fit a little nicer. Not the end of the world. How important that is to you guys is up to the individual builder. How exact do you want your canopy and the fit and finish to be without any induced stress? That's totally up to you guys. I'm trying to go a little above and beyond because I want to do it right. Of course, once it's done, it's done. It's going to look the way that it looks for the life of the airplane unless somebody comes around and wants to build a new canopy frame. So I'm really taking my time and I'm really paying attention to the details. So having said that, here's another thing. You can see on the frame here, there's this flat, all right? And then coming off of this flat through here is going to be your frame rail that runs through here. That piece is also vertical. You can look potentially and see that this piece is not vertical. You can see the side of the fuselage here, and then this piece is angled in ever so slightly. It kind of rolls in a little bit. It's very easy to fix, but you can see when you straighten that out, it pulls the frame in a little bit, and it flexes this tube a little bit. So again, things just are all over the place and things move around a lot, and you make a change in one area, it makes an effect on the other area or some other area. So again, I'm bringing up all these details just so you can think about how things interact when you go through the process. Whether or not you care, I don't know. But these are just little details that I'm discovering as I work through this. So as of right now, I'm going to try to get these corners to fit a little better so the skin doesn't get hung up in here. I'm going to try to get this a little bit more vertical. I'm going to start working on trying to get the frame sides moved in and out so they're more in line with the fuselage sides. And then I also want to start fitting these side rail pieces. Now remember, I had this all together once. So my side rail pieces, here's one, they're already riveted to the top curve piece. So I want to start fitting that. I want to get that clamped back in here and run along the bottom and see how these side pieces, when they interact with the frame, what do they change? So still tweaking, steady as she goes. And we'll get there. All right, I'll talk to you guys later. Well, as you can see, I am now starting to incorporate more of the actual canopy framing into fitting this forward frame in this skin. All right, so again, just to recap a little bit, I have the skin clecoed to the frame just on the forward edge and this bottom edge on both sides. I do not have any spacers between the main frame and the flanges of the hinges. So that means that the skin is back in its like normal position, for lack of a better term. It's just clecoed directly to the frame here. These clecos here, this is clecoed directly to the frame. There are no spacers in between. So along the top, especially in the middle area in here, I've got a good size gap. I'm going to say that's probably, it's close to an 1/8 inch, which is way too much, but I'm okay with it for now, and I'll explain that here in a minute. It's tighter along the edge here, which is fine for now. The reason I wanted to move on to incorporating some of the rest of the frame is because this side rail butts up against the end of the forward frame. You probably can't see that well because it's hidden behind this plate. But this side frame comes over and it butts up against this forward frame behind this joint plate. One of the things that can do potentially is, like I said, since it's hinged here, it's attached here at the hinge point, the rest of this is not supported. It's not attached in any way. So this rail can effectively push on this and take this corner and drive it forward. You have to be mindful of that, because as it drives this corner forward, it could potentially open up more of a gap on top. The other thing that I wanted to do, I wanted to get the side rails and everything else of the frame in position. You can see I've got my spacers as called out in the instructions. I've got my spacers in place. I got the rail in place. I've got the rail even with the side of the fuselage. I've got this back part of the canopy frame in line with the roll bar around the radius. I've got it clamped in place. And the reason I wanted to do all that, again, is because that interaction between having this set up and if affects changes to this frame. With it spaced correctly here, the side rail spaced off of the long run like it's supposed to be, you have to make an alignment between this forward frame and this frame using this angle bracket. And as I've talked about before, since I had gone through this process once before, this angle bracket is already riveted to my side rail. So with everything on the side rail spaced correctly and clamped in place, you can see the relationship between it and the forward frame as far as elevation this way and as far as having this splice plate connected to, which affects this dimension here, the side-to-side dimension. So now that that is all locked down, that helps to bring the frame, the forward frame, in alignment with the side of the fuselage. And as I said, the length of this side rail has an impact on this forward edge down here in the corner. So I wanted to get this laid out the way it's supposed to be in relationship to the fuselage and in relationship to the roll bar, and then see how that impacts a change on this forward frame. So I'm going to go with that. This is pretty critical through here. This setup in here is pretty critical. So I'm kind of using that as a guide to dictate how this ends up coming together. So like I said, for right now, I'm not concerned about that top gap because I don't have my spacers in, which is fine for now. The other thing that you want to look at is the relationship between the edge of this skin in relationship to the top of the longeron through here. That should be exact, or as close to exact as you can get it. You don't want this skin to be in alignment with the top of the fuselage here, and then as you come back, it opens up a gap. And again, that is mostly dictated by this side rail once you have it spaced and clamped in place where it needs to be. That, along with clamping in your splice plate between the clamped frame and the forward frame, that dictates the angle of this piece. In other words, remember how I talked about how you can grab the forward frame and move it up and down, which affects the gap on the skin? With everything clamped in place here and here, that now dictates exactly where this overall angle for this needs to rest. That's why I wanted to get this kind of structure in place. So you'll also note at this point I have not drilled any of these holes. I've not match drilled any of the holes through here. And again, everything is just held in place with clecos. So now that I've got this other framework in place and I'm happy with it, I'm happy with the frame for now, I'm happy with the skin for now, I'm going to go ahead and mark these 5 holes on the splice plate. These 5 holes here on both sides, and I'm going to come back and cleco everything together with these holes, and then I'll locate these holes. And I've already got my wedges made and in place from the previous build, so it's just a matter of match drilling these holes to the new frame. I'm going to do that next, and then I'll come back and I'll see how everything looks when it's more permanently attached. All right, talk to you guys here in a minute.